Hey guys, this is Punished Aqua coming to you live, well, semi-live. By the time you hear this, it will no longer be live, but it was live when I recorded it, I guess. Anyways, this is Punished Aqua. I'm coming here today to talk about something I thought of yesterday as I was watching news about the migrant crisis, and it kind of reflects something we used to see a lot in the ancient world. The most famous example of this is probably the Babylonian captivity of the Jews, but it's a concept known as forced migration or cultural, or you could call it, I guess, cultural or tribal or national deportation. It's the idea that when a people is conquered, they are scattered among the larger empire. And there are several reasons this used to happen in the ancient world and probably happened up until the modern era, and in my opinion, is happening again right now. Uh, First and foremost, or I'll break down these reasons now, and then we'll go into them. The first reason you would see a conqueror, say Babylon or Persia or another empire that might decide to do this, would be to destroy the national identity or in the cultural and ethnic identity of the people that they had just conquered. It's a lot harder for these tribes and these nations to resist a conqueror if its people are scattered throughout the larger empire. If there's a holding here and a holding there and a holding over here and another holding 400 miles away, especially in the ancient world, it's more difficult to communicate, it's more difficult to keep together, and it's easier to assimilate these other alien cultures that you've conquered into your own culture. Uh, the next reason would be beyond preventing political instability and forcing assimilation is to undermine, well, to undermine cultural identities, but also to spread one's religion among the new population. Now, this varied depending on certain cultures. Some cultures, like Persia, were less interested in forcing you to adopt their religion and their religious practices. Rome was also similar in that regard. They usually, for the most part, didn't care what religion you followed, so long as you were willing to make the occasional sacrifice, especially in the later empire, to the deified Roman emperor. If you refuse, this could carry heavy consequences, as both Jews and Christians learned during the reign of Emperor Trajan. This was not considered a good thing to by the Romans to refuse to do because it was for national solidarity. And then finally, it's a demonstration of the ruler's absolute power over you. Uh, in this last regard, by uprooting you and sending you wherever he wanted, the ruler was showing in a very visceral way to the conquered peoples that you lived and died at his pleasure. And not only did you live and die at his pleasure, where you lived and died was also in his control. Where you lived, what you did, how you survived, if you survived. All of these are at the whim of the conqueror. And by deporting people, it was a massive way to, it was a direct way to show the world, and show the conquered people that their lives and who they were is over. That time is gone. So looking at this, we're going to try to break down these concepts and see exactly where, how this applies to the current migrant crisis, and I think the forced deportation around the world. To the first point, that forced migration and forced deportations of nations destabilizes the nations in question. This is clearly obvious. The forced deportation of millions of Syrians has diluted Syrian culture in Syria, as has the massive number of deaths caused by the Syrian civil war and the actions of various nations taking part in this civil war, from America to Russia to Syria to ISIS, you see a massive outflow of Syrian culture into, yes, you're seeing a massive outflow of Syrian culture into mostly Europe and a few other areas around the world, like maybe Australia, Western nations. But what you're also seeing at the same time is a massive dilution of traditional Syrian culture. And you'll see over the next couple of generations, even though Syrians will, especially Syrian Muslims, which are for the most part the only peoples that have been actually taken in as refugees, Europe isn't very keen on taking in Syrian Jews or Syrian Christians, it seems. But Syrian Muslims, while they'll likely retain their religion, there will be some conversions, but because of the way conversion is looked upon in Islamic cultures, you won't see that many, uh, mainly because people don't want to be killed. But you will see some religious conversions. For the most part, what you'll see is that the actual Syrian culture these peoples had will start to disappear. At the same time, the cultures, they'll start to adopt the cultures of Europe or Australia. And I say Europe or Australia because Europe is actively taking part in this forced migration to eradicate cultures of its own, which I will get to in a second. But you will see that the traditional Syrian culture is going to evaporate and it's going to be replaced by a more unified global culture, a more unified, I shouldn't say unified, but a more global culture, a more globalist set of traditions are going to replace Syrian traditions and Syrian culture in Europe and in Australia over the next 2 or 3 generations. To the point that in 2 generations, maybe even 3 generations, Syrians that still live in Syria will in no way, shape, or form resemble Syrians in Western Europe, Eastern Europe, or Australia. However, the Syrians in Australia, Western, and Eastern Europe will resemble one another. There will be slight language differences because Europe hasn't gotten around to forcing a unified language on everyone. They're still trying to get unified culture first. In my mind, they should have gone about it the other way. They should have come up with a European common lingua franca before, or a common. I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm using. I believe it's lingua franca. Basically, they should have come up with a common. They should have come up with a common tongue for Europe first. If everybody in Europe was speaking the same language, as opposed to speaking dozens and dozens of disparate languages, it would be much easier for them to foist this European culture upon them. European Union kind of fucked up on that. Oh, sorry. Now I'm going to be demonetized. My New Jersey came out. But what Europe's trying to do is the European Union right now is at the same time as the Syrian national culture is largely being diminished and destroyed. Europe is trying to do this. The European Union is trying to do the same thing to its own nation states. Every European culture in the European Union right now is more or less being forced to dilute its own culture with millions and millions of foreign immigrants. Now, yes, these foreign immigrants themselves, who are being moved in this Babylonian style system of forced migration, will be will lose their own cultures over time. This is true, but as they lose their cultures, European cultures will be changed as well. And as millions and millions of these refugees from Syria, from North Africa, from Pakistan, from all over the Middle East start to lose their traditional tribal cultures and adopt a globalized culture, Europeans will be forced to do the same by their own governments. It will happen incrementally and slowly over the next generation or two. But the end goal is that within 2 generations, Polish culture will no longer be Polish culture. English culture will no longer be English culture. French culture will no longer be French. Spanish culture will no longer be Spanish, and German culture will no longer be German. All these different countries in the European Union will be replaced with a quote unquote new European culture, a pan-national, transnational, globalist culture that supplants the disparate and unique cultures of Europe into a homogenous entity. The best example I can use to describe this would be the United States itself. If we go back to the era just after, or even before the Revolutionary War, if we go back to the colonial era, you will find that each of these individual states, whether it's Georgia, whether it's Virginia, whether it's Tennessee, oh, not Tennessee, sorry, whether it's Georgia, whether it's Virginia, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, these different states, these different colonies, all had very disparate cultures. Even now, even today, there's still some differences in the culture between Alabama and New York, or California and Colorado. I mean, there's a lot more in common between California and Colorado than, say, Alabama and New York. But these are all these different. The different states all have their own unique regional cultures. But these unique regional cultures have largely been subsumed into the overall American culture that we're more familiar with. So that there is more in common now between someone from Alabama and New York, for instance, than there was between Alabama and New York 200 years ago. Uh, the original idea was that each of these different states were technically different nations, all banding together. Uh, the cost, of course, was a measure of national culture and national diversity for homogenization, and that's the real goal behind these different these different forced marches is homogenization. Uh, Moving on to the second point, that this is a way to undermine. It's a way to undermine national sovereignty. It's also a way to push religious homogeny upon the world. You hear this a lot in academia, especially from edgy atheists, Satanists, and other largely disparate skeptics, is that one of the biggest causes of war in the world is traditionally religion. Historically speaking, this is actually inaccurate. Uh, Religion is not the largest cause of war in either the modern world or the ancient, but it is a commonly enough, or is a commonly repeated myth, repeated commonly enough that I felt I should address it. Instead, what we should look at is political and national and cultural differences and a lack of resources that lead to the formation of most wars. Nevertheless, it has long been repeated, especially among conspiracy theorists, that one of the end goals of a globalist and globalized society is a one world unified religion. And I don't necessarily see that happening anytime soon. People tend to cling to their religions, at least traditionally, even more fervently than they cling to their nations, which historically has been extremely fervently to begin with. However, one thing you see in a modern, secularist, globalized world is that religious identity starts to become much, much less important. So while I don't see the one world unified religion happening anytime soon, you can see the beginnings of it, specifically in things like the interfaith movements, in which a good example, again using the U.S., would be the current interfaith gatherings they have. Instead of basically a chaplain, as I understand it, can reside over multiple religious groups coming together into one thing. So you can have Hindus worshiping idols right next to Christians worshiping Jesus, while Satanists sing out praises to Lucifer. And on the one hand, from a secular point of view, this seems like a great idea. On another hand, and even in many regards, to a Hindu point of view, this is a perfectly reasonable sort of thing. This sort of reflects the multiplicity of religions in India, which is a model I think the UN should actually look at rather than these replacement methods. But I digress. To a Hindu mindset, this is also fine because Hindus accept just about all religions in and of themselves. Uh, that we're speaking religiously and culturally, not politically and nationally. I understand the tensions in the India today between Islam and Hinduism, but that is a whole history that deserves its own video. So we're not going to really touch on that today. Uh, Anyways, from a Christian or Judaic standpoint, however, the notion of worshiping God right next to somebody worshiping Baal or Lucifer or Krishna is heretical and blasphemous. It is horribly blasphemous. So we can already see that just by forcing interfaith movements on people, religious and government leaders are engaging in a form of blasphemy. I'm not gonna go too much into the religious aspect right now, but that is something I will touch upon in the future as an effect of globalism, these interfaith movements. Just rest assured that interfaith, like intermingling of cultures, the eventual goal is the devaluation of individual religions to the point that you just associate all religions together. And these different concepts blend, they shift from one to the other, so that no religion, in the end, just like no nation, looks the way it was. And I don't really need to touch on the third point. The third point is kind of understandable, except to say that modern forced migration, clearly we don't have an open ruler, an open council, but the effect is still largely the same as if we had been conquered by a military force in the ancient past, like Babylon, by these groups, these globalists, our would-be masters, our would-be kings, going to say Honduras and displacing 15,000 people, and then another several thousand people from El Salvador, from Guatemala, from all these different places, and forcing them into the United States. It is an attempt to dilute our culture. It is not meant to be, hey, we've brought them in, bam, your culture is diluted. It's a slow process with the idea of undermining the notions of what does it mean to be an American? What does it mean to be an American citizen? What does it mean to be who you are in a nation? If 15,000 people from El Salvador can just walk in, I'm sorry, from Honduras can just walk into the United States, and now they're in the United States as United States citizens or refugees or anything. What does that mean to be an American? I mean, does being an American matter anymore? If anybody who wants to can just form a caravan or join a caravan and you're granted citizenship, no, being an American means nothing. Being an American citizen means nothing. It's just a data point. It's flavor text on the bottom of a magic card, more or less. It doesn't affect anything. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't mean you are anything anymore. You're just, in effect, another displaced person. You're no different than them, other than you haven't left your house. You've just also lost your country. And I'm probably going to wrap it up there because we're reaching about 20 minutes, and I just kind of wanted to make a short little video. Basically, I was watching the migrant crisis yesterday on the news, like most of us have been, and it occurred to me that this is a lot like what ancient cultures did. I just wanted to put that idea out there. I hadn't seen anybody else really talk about it. In the future, I'm going to do some more research into this and discuss this topic further, actually write out a script and have these data points in front of me instead of just doing this extemporaneously. But yeah, so I'm just gonna end it there. I hope you enjoyed the video. Leave a like, comment, or subscribe if you do enjoy the content. And again, this is Punished Aqua, 1st of November. Hope you have a great day and get out and vote red, because if we let the Democrats take back control of the House and the Senate, or even maybe just the House, there's a very real chance that we will lose our country to these globalists. We will lose everything it means to be an American. I am a nationalist. I hope you're a nationalist too. I hope you love America more than any other country in the world. And if you're not an American, I hope you love your country more than any other country in the world, because you should. It's your home. Peace.